Aksha here. I got myself the new Archer and Olive notepads. Yes, not journals, notepads. Like me, you might be wondering whether these are worth buying. So in this video, I'm going to do a review of the notepads. I got all 3 colours and I'll talk through some creative ways that I've used them. As an FYI, this video is not sponsored. I just bought these notepads because I've been wanting something like this for a while and I saw that Archer and Olive just released them. So let's get to the review. Like the Archer and Olive journals, the notepads arrive in these lovely boxes which prevent them from getting damaged. I then like to use these boxes in my desk drawers to help the children stay away from some of my valuables. There are 3 different types, one for black paper, one for white and one with craft paper, and I can think of reasons to use all 3. There isn't a front cover, it's just the notepad and it has a leather back which is really soft. It's really nice leather. When you unbox it, you immediately smell leather and it's just so soft when you hold it. That's what I noticed when I first held it in my hands. The notepads just feel like they're really good quality. The paper is 160 GSM, just like the Archer and Olive journals. I find the pages in the journals perfect for anything I want to do because I never need to worry about my pens ghosting or bleeding. You can just use whatever pen you like, which is just perfect. I know from my journal the paper doesn't respond perfectly to watercolour, so if you get carried away with water in your journal, you can get pilling on the pages because it's not watercolour paper and the pages may warp slightly. So I'm keen to see what happens if you use one of these sheets for watercolour and stick it into your journal. It might at least keep your journal pages from warping. Comparing the paper to my Archer and Olive journal paper, it looks like it's the same. There aren't any visible differences. So in terms of colour and alignment of dots, it will match the pages in your journal pretty well. Edges are rounded in the same way as the journals, so you should be able to just rip this out and stick it straight in if you need to. It should all line up without you having to cut round the edges, but I'll show you that when I talk through what I've done with it. The margin at the end looks like it's a bit thicker than the actual journal. But I don't think that will bother me too much, just an observation. I'll see how it looks in the actual journal in a minute. Now I'll talk through some of the ways that I've used them and show you what it's like to tear off a page, since that's what the notepads are for really, and I'll let you decide whether you'll make use of them. The pages tear off quite easily. I was a bit scared of ripping it, but I think that was just me panicking for no reason. When I did it a few times, they just ripped off really easily without any trouble. The edge is perforated, which I think is expected. I'll see if that disappears when you stick it straight into the journal. It seems quite easy to stick into the journal because it's the same size and the same shape as the journal pages. You can cover up the perforated edge by sticking it into the crease of the journal. But there does seem to be a bit of a gap on the edge of the paper. I can see a bit of my white paper poking through. It may be that I haven't stuck it down properly, so I'll do some more as we go through the video and see what that's like. The first and most obvious way you can use the white notepad is to replace pages in your journal when you're really unhappy with how a spread turned out. I really didn't like how my June Simple Things list looked, and I made it worse by adding these crazy trees to it. So if I had this notepad, I would have just stuck a whole page in my journal to cover it up. Oops! Make sure you do your spread on the right side of the paper so the curved edges line up to the curved edges in your journal. My mistake. I had to do that spread again so that I could line it up in the journal so it's on the right side of the page. That sticks in quite nicely. I can still see the gap on the edge. I don't know if maybe I'm sticking it too close to the centre. So I'll see what happens with the next one. In May, I did a watercolour theme and it warped some of my pages. So now I'm going to try doing one directly in the notepad and sticking it in. Remember, it's not watercolour paper, so you do have to be a bit careful to not go overboard and cause the pages to pill. But you can freely use watercolour or paint without worrying about mistakes, and you can stick the one that works out well into your journal. Sticking it into my journal, I need to press it down quite hard because the notepad paper did warp, so it didn't quite line up with the journal pages, so I'm pushing it down quite hard to make it line up with the journal. The page doesn't feel as warped as it would have if I did it directly in the journal, and it doesn't feel too thick either. So I think to be on the safe side, if I'm using watercolour, I'll do it like this. Next, I cut a square out of the black notepad paper. Having the dots on the paper makes me feel much more comfortable with writing lots of text, so I wrote one of my favourite poems in on this black paper. The white pen looks really good on the black because it feels like really good quality paper. So sticking that into my journal just looks really nice. I'm quite happy with how that turned out. Over on the next page, I've ripped some of the craft paper to make a header. You can of course use regular craft paper, which would be much cheaper for these headers, but I do quite like having the dots on there so I can line up my writing along the dots. This craft paper is also lighter than the other craft paper that I have, and it's a nice bright colour which brightens up my journal quite nicely. I also cut some squares out to stick at the bottom of my page and drew some flowers on them. Again, having the dots on the paper made it a lot easier to measure out the squares and make these flowers for the bottom of the page, which I usually fiddle around with quite a bit. This made it much simpler. You can also get creative by making a Dutch door in your journal and sticking a piece of paper behind it so it looks really pretty. It's a really nice aesthetic, so this is a nice, pretty one for Instagram. Finally, you can rip out a page and do a nice drawing or a quote page. This can be framed and given to someone as a present. You could do a picture that represents something, or a quote, or even something like 30 things I love about you for someone's 30th birthday. I also think I'll make use of these single page spreads for photography, for my website, or for social media. So overall, I found quite a few different uses for these notepads. Don't get me wrong, it is a luxury having Archer and Olive notepads for this purpose. You can use regular notepads with craft black and white paper and your spreads will turn out fine. But I did love that the paper was really good quality and it lined up perfectly with my journal. So with limited time, I can correct mistakes or do creative spreads by sticking pages in my journal without having to cut round the edges, and the dots on the page will make it easier to cut and stick squares into my journal and keep my handwriting nice and neat. All in all, I'll be using these quite often. I hope you found this useful. Let me know if you're going to go for one of these and how you plan to use it. See you in my next video.